Welcome to the Pencil Bob channel. I hope you enjoy my stories.
I'll never forget the moment I opened that email from the HOA. My stomach twisted into a knot as I read through the lines, each word more absurd than the last. Phrases like 325% increase and "we've only heard from 15% of property owners" jumped out at me, almost taunting in their ridiculousness. I had to reread the part about raising dues from $172 to $560 a year just to make sure my eyes weren't playing tricks on me. How did they think this was going to fly? They didn't even make quorum, yet here they were, acting like they could wave a magic wand and rewrite the rules without consequence. It wasn't just irresponsible. It was outright insulting. The arrogance of it all, the audacity to assume we wouldn't notice or care, made my blood boil. It was like watching someone cheat at a game in broad daylight, expecting everyone else to turn a blind eye. The email was condescending too, filled with phrases like "welcoming to have interaction," and "last-minute comments are welcomed," as if we were all supposed to feel lucky they were pretending to care about our input. I'd attended exactly one HOA meeting before this, and it was enough to show me what kind of people were running the show. They spent the whole time obsessing over liability insurance so residents couldn't sue them. Not one word about improving the neighborhood or addressing the things that mattered to us. It was clear their priorities didn't include us, but this latest stunt was on another level entirely. The board knew they didn't have the votes to push through a rate hike this outrageous, yet here they were, strutting around like they could bluff their way into making it happen. It wasn't just bold, it was outright shameless. And why were they doing it? Because they assumed we wouldn't push back. Because they thought we were too apathetic or too scattered to stand up to them. That email might as well have said, "We're doing this whether you like it or not. Try and stop us." It was a slap in the face, a blatant challenge, and the sheer gall of it made my blood boil. To make matters worse, this was the same HOA that told me I could keep chickens. I'd gone through all the proper channels, filed for permits, dotted every I, and crossed every T. A few months later, I got an email from them saying the chickens had to go. No explanation, no apology, just an order. I'd responded with all the documentation proving I was within my rights and told them to pound sand. After that, crickets. That was months ago, and they hadn't dared follow up. So you can imagine how much respect I had for their authority. Spoiler, none. Still, this latest move was a different level of ridiculous. I wasn't about to sit quietly while they tried to pull this off. I knew other homeowners felt the same way. The board's email mentioned they'd only heard from 15% of us, but I was willing to bet that number would skyrocket once word got out about this 325% increase. So I did what any rational person would do. I started spreading the news. I called my neighbors, sent texts, and even posted in our community Facebook group. The responses came flooding in. People were furious. "Are they out of their minds?" one neighbor replied. "How do they think anyone can afford that?" another wrote. Someone else pointed out that the board hadn't even bothered to explain where all this extra money would go, aside from vague mentions of maintaining common grounds. The day of the December 21st meeting arrived and I showed up early. The community center was packed. More people than I'd ever seen at an HOA meeting before. The air was charged with tension as neighbors murmured to each other, sharing their frustrations and theories about what the board was trying to pull. I took a seat near the front, ready to see how this would unfold. The board members sat at a long table looking smug and self-assured. Karen, the HOA president, opened the meeting with her usual fake smile plastered across her face. "Thank you all for coming," she said, as if we were here by choice and not because they were trying to financially ruin us. "We're here to discuss some important matters regarding the future of our community." "Like bankrupting us," someone shouted from the back, their voice dripping with sarcasm. The room exploded into laughter and a wave of applause, the kind that made it clear everyone was fed up. Karen's confident smile wavered, just for a heartbeat, before she quickly plastered it back on, pretending the jab hadn't hit its mark. But it was there, that tiny flicker of discomfort, and it spoke louder than any words could. "We understand that this proposed increase has raised some concerns," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "But we assure you it's necessary to maintain the quality of our neighborhood." "Quality? What quality?" another neighbor fired back, their voice sharp and cutting. "The playground's a death trap. The pool's been shut down for 2 years, and let's not forget half the streetlights don't even work." Their words hung in the air, sparking a ripple of agreement through the room as others nodded and muttered in frustration. The tension was thick, and the board members shifted uncomfortably, clearly unprepared for this level of pushback. Karen's face turned red, but she pressed on. As outlined in the email, the board has the authority to raise dues by 20% without a vote. Anything beyond that requires approval from the majority of property owners. Which you don't have, I chimed in. You can't even make quorum, so why are we even having this discussion? Karen glared at me. We're hoping to engage more residents and build consensus, she said, her voice tight. Consensus? I said, standing up. You mean pretending we agreed to this while you steamroll over us? This isn't about maintaining the neighborhood. It's about lining your pockets or covering up for your mismanagement. The room erupted again, and this time Karen couldn't hide her irritation. She slammed her gavel down, demanding order, but the damage was done. People were shouting questions, demanding transparency, and calling out the board for their incompetence. One board member, clearly uncomfortable, tried to step in. Let's all remain civil, he said, his voice barely audible over the chaos. We're just trying to do what's best for the community. If you cared about the community, you'd actually listen to us, someone yelled. This isn't a dictatorship. The meeting devolved into a shouting match, with Karen and the board trying and failing to regain control. It was clear they hadn't expected this level of pushback. They kept insisting the rate hike was necessary, but they couldn't provide any concrete answers about where the money would go or why such a massive increase was needed. By the end of the meeting, no resolutions were made. The board promised to take our concerns into consideration, but no one believed them. As I walked out, I overheard neighbors talking about organizing a recall election to get rid of the current board. Others were considering legal action. One thing was clear. This fight was far from over. The board might have thought they could bully us into submission, but they underestimated how much we cared about our homes and our community. They'd lit a fire, and now they were going to have to deal with the consequences. The very next morning, I met with a small group of neighbors in my living room. People were energized, fueled by anger and a shared determination to stop this madness. There were about 15 of us, representing a mix of younger families and retirees, each bringing their own frustrations and ideas to the table. It was clear we needed a plan, not just to stop the rate hike but to hold the board accountable for their actions. We need to organize, my neighbor Linda said. She was a retired paralegal, sharp as a tack and ready to take them on. The board is banking on us being disorganized. Let's prove them wrong. Can we force a recall vote? Someone asked. Yes, Linda replied, flipping through a copy of the HOA bylaws she'd printed out. We need signatures from 25% of property owners to trigger a recall election. From there, it's a simple majority vote to oust them. But it'll take coordination. Count me in, I said. I'll knock on every door in this neighborhood if I have to. That's exactly what we did. Over the next few weeks, we canvassed every street, knocking on doors, handing out flyers, and explaining what the board was trying to pull. People were outraged, and the signatures came rolling in. Some neighbors hadn't even read the email about the dues increase until we brought it up. Others shared their own horror stories about the board's behavior. Fines for non-existent violations, arbitrary rule changes, and outright harassment. Meanwhile, Linda started digging into the financials. As a homeowner, she had the right to request access to the HOA's budget and expense reports. What she found was infuriating. Thousands of dollars spent on legal fees with no explanation, inflated invoices for landscaping, and payments to contractors who didn't appear to exist. It was a mess, and it only strengthened our resolve to take them down. The board, of course, caught wind of our efforts. Karen sent out a mass email claiming we were spreading misinformation, and that our actions were damaging to the community. It was laughable. If anyone was damaging the community, it was them. The recall election was scheduled for February, and the tension in the neighborhood was palpable. Signs started popping up on lawns, some supporting the recall, others defending the board. Karen and her allies tried to drum up support by hosting a town hall, but it backfired spectacularly. The residents who showed up didn't hold back, bombarding the board with questions about the budget, the dues hike, and their general incompetence. Karen ended up storming out of the meeting, claiming she was being personally attacked. On the day of the recall vote, the community center was packed. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen. The ballots were counted twice to ensure accuracy, and when the results were announced, the room erupted in cheers. The recall had passed with 72% of the vote. Karen and her cronies were out. But we didn't stop there. The new board, made up of neighbors we actually trusted, immediately launched an independent audit of the HOA's finances. What they uncovered was even worse than we'd imagined. Karen and her inner circle had been funneling money into a private account under the guise of consulting fees. the total, over $50,000. The new board turned the evidence over to law enforcement, and soon after, Karen and 2 other former board members were under investigation for embezzlement. Watching her get hauled out of her house in handcuffs was, admittedly, satisfying. With the corrupt board gone, we were finally able to focus on fixing the mess they'd left behind. The new board worked tirelessly to renegotiate contracts, repair the playground, and get the finances back on track. As for the 325% dues increase, that was off the table for good. It wasn't a happy ending exactly. The neighborhood was still divided, and it would take time to rebuild trust. But at least we'd proven one thing. When people come together and refuse to back down, even the most corrupt HOA doesn't stand a chance. They're telling you that there isn't enough being raised to pay bills and have a reserve fund, and to get things where they need to be, at least 67% of homeowners must vote in favor of the dues increase. If that doesn't happen, if a big repair or project comes up in the future, and the association can't pay because it's broke, the board may be allowed to charge a special assessment, which is basically an emergency demand for. If that happens, you'll have no choice and zero input. Go to this meeting if you can and get some details. If the association really has no money because dues haven't been raised, an increase is warranted. Maybe not as significantly as what's being proposed, but warranted nonetheless. And be sure to ask what would happen if the association wasn't able to pay for some big repair. Would that mean a special assessment? Quorum of homeowners is not needed for the board to pass a budget and raise dues. Depending on the state and other factors, they can raise the dues more than 20% without a homeowner vote or quorum if these are emergency expenses. Or they may only raise the dues 20% but then collect an emergency special assessment. Like if you are in F, the HOA is required to 100% fund the reserves each year, unless the homeowners vote to fund it at a lower amount each year. The audacity of this HOA is truly mind-boggling. Not only are they attempting to implement an astronomical 325% increase in dues, but they're doing so without proper authorization or transparency. This is a blatant abuse of power and a complete disregard for the rights of homeowners. The fact that they admitted to only hearing from 15% of property owners on this issue, yet still proceeded with their plans, shows a shocking level of disrespect for the community they claim to serve. Furthermore, their obsession with obtaining insurance to protect themselves from lawsuits is highly suspicious. It suggests they're more concerned with covering their own behinds than actually addressing the needs and concerns of residents. This, coupled with their flip-flopping on the chicken issue, paints a picture of an incompetent and potentially corrupt organization. It's high time for homeowners to band together and demand accountability from these so-called leaders. We need to push for more transparent processes, fair voting procedures, and a board that actually listens to its constituents. The days of HOAs acting like petty dictatorship need to come to an end. Let this be a wake-up call to all homeowners. Stay vigilant, know your rights, and don't let these power-hungry bureaucrats walk all over you.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.